Hey, be a squid and subscribe to my mediocrity. How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Trash or Treasure featuring the entire wolf armor set, including the backpack. Now, honestly, I'm not entirely sure that the backpack is actually a part of this whole armor set, but I'm just assuming it is because it's, you know, a wolf armor set. But anyway, so starting off with the backpack, the 2 protection is actually fairly nice considering that if you're building a tank armor set, you're going to want this backpack. Not only does it have decent capacity, but that 2 protection is actually pretty big for a backpack. Not to mention, it looks pretty cool. I mean, like, look at this shit. This is like some fucking, I don't even know what, but this is like some demon shit right here. So, I mean, considering the fact that it matches with the armor set, as well as it offers that 2 protection and 75 capacity, I mean, I can't deny the fact that this is actually quite good. Moving on over to the armor set, we're going to talk about the boots first. So we got 2 protection, 18 resistance, and 15 ethereal protection, if I remember correctly. I believe that's what that is. So essentially when you're fighting the ghost, that's what you're going to have resistance to, which is pretty good considering that there's a few places where that's going to come into play. Not only that, but you're pretty fucking tanky, and the minimal negativities are actually not as bad as some of the other armor sets out there. Even on the heavier chest piece, you would assume that there'd be a lot more negativity to the stamina cost and the movement speed, but actually it's really not that bad, and you're still getting a fairly decent amount of protections. Now, when we move on over to the helmet, we are getting that plus 30% mana cost, which is not exactly the greatest thing in the world considering that the weapons are not the greatest. I'll get to the weapons here in a second, but just assuming the fact that you wanted to wear this armor set and use the whole shebang, right? You wanted to use the claymore, or you wanted to use just the regular little wolf sword. The 30% mana cost, I would say that you need to kind of mix magic in order to make one of these weapons work, just because you want to enchant your weapons or anything like that, or maybe you want to go the discipline route. It depends. But if you're trying to boost your damage, you need to either use stamina or mana, and considering the fact that mana cost is a negativity on this armor set, you're better off running a discipline, fucking ability set, so that way you don't have to rely so heavily on mana. Moving on over to the wolf shield, we've got 35 damage, 54 impact, and 18 impact resistance. Considering that it is a kite shield and not a tower shield, obviously you're not going to get a whole lot of serious resistance from it, but in my personal opinion, if you're running a shield build with the proper abilities, you can actually do pretty damn well with this shield. I'm not gonna lie, it actually kind of works better than the actual sword itself. Now to move on to somewhat of an underwhelming weapon, the wolf sword. Now unfortunately, I'm severely underwhelmed by this weapon considering that it has no other effects whatsoever. It's got 28 damage, 23 impact, and 1 attack speed. Now the 1 attack speed is probably the best quality about this, and it does have decent damage. I will say it's got about as much damage as, like, let's say, like, what, this iron great axe. It actually has more damage than this iron great axe. So just the damage itself is one of the best, but unfortunately that doesn't necessarily cut it later on in the game, which is kind of sad because you don't really get this weapon till later on in the game towards Levant whenever you unlock the secret vendor in the city. So given the fact that the damage is mediocre and the impact is whatever and the attack speed is somewhat decent, there are weapons that you can get earlier in the game that make more sense. Just to put things into perspective, I would much rather use a fanged weapon over this weapon, just because it does bleed damage and has decent damage overall. So it's just, the wolf sword is not as good as I want it to be. However, it is a sword and it does have good combos. If you know what I'm talking about, you can do something like this and then that move right there where you slash upwards, boom, this move. That actually works as somewhat of a dodge. So with that being said, I will say the sword combos are nice and decent, but like I said, the weapon itself is pretty underwhelming, but it is what it is. If you have some rags with you or varnishes, you can make this weapon a lot more interesting and cooler to use, but it'd be better if it just had something else along with it without having to carry out sources to make the weapon better. So let's go ahead and conclude this video. The Brass Wolf backpack is a treasure. That 2 protection is super crazy, and the capacity that you can hold with it, as well as just having 75 along with protection, I can't deny that that is a indeed treasure. As for the armor set, I'm also going to call it a treasure. The minimalistic negativities as well as just the look of it in general is actually pretty good. I can't deny the fact that it has decent protections as well as it looks amazing. There's a lot of armor sets in this game that kind of look trashy and they have decent or very amazing stats, but this is one of those armor sets that I think looks cool as well as is practical and works through any point of the game, and it actually will carry you farther than you would expect. Moving on to the shield, I'm also going to say treasure. This shield does a decent bit of damage as long as you're running a shield build and you want to actually do damage. This is actually a great starting point or even a mid point, but I would recommend upgrading as you progress through the game to a tower shield if you want more defensive, but if you're trying to be more of an aggressor and you want a more aggressive one-hander build, this shield will do the trick, but like I said, I still recommend upgrading later on. And as for the sword, unfortunately, I'm gonna have to say trash. I like the way it looks. I think it's just one of the coolest looking swords in the damn game, but it just doesn't cut it. Later on in the game, you're fighting creatures that require that elemental damage just to even do slightly any damage whatsoever, so the fact that you have to rely on outsources just to make this weapon somewhat good, you would have to stock up like I do with like traps and stuff like that. You'd have to have rags on rags on rags. It's just kind of a bit annoying. I want a weapon that I can rely on without having to outsource to other materials just to make it good. That just doesn't work for me. Alright boys, that's gonna call it for today's video. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.